next session, organic changes in the next 5 years, mergers, combinations, closures, tenure, governance, new curriculum, lifelong learning, some of the concepts we have touched on just very, very briefly. Now they'll be treated a bit more thoroughly. And Erin Arvedlund from the Philadelphia Inquirer, a wonderful author. And I guess you have an article appearing every other day, something like that. And let me turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing from you and your panel. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hope you had your coffee. Is this thing on? Now it's on. Okay. Welcome back. I want to introduce the president of Rowan University, who's asked a terrific round of questions. Houshmand, Lloyd, president Emeritus, University of Toledo, and Jeffrey Gold, who, among other things, is Chancellor of the University of Nebraska and Peter Gold's illustrious brother. That's a credential by itself, right? So we're going to get started with organic changes in the next 5 years: mergers, combinations, closures, tenure, governance, etc. So among some of our speakers here, I think I would like to hear from Ali first, because you actually have some real life experience with this at Rowan. And just as a preface, we've been writing stories at the Philadelphia Inquirer about a lot of the M&A that's taking place in education. We've seen Jefferson merging with Philadelphia University. We've seen Chinese education companies coming in and buying colleges outright in New Jersey. Is that correct? Yeah. So I think it's going to be, it's big business. Let's put it that way. So why don't we get started with you, Rowan?
Good afternoon, everybody. What I wanted to do is I want to give you a little bit of introduction about what Rowan is and what we have done over the past 10 years or so, because when I look at the title of this session, almost everything that we talk about except tenure and what to do with it, I will let Lloyd to deal with that part of it. But the rest of it we have touched. Merger, maybe not closure, but closure of some programs as well. But I started the presidents of Rowan University in year 2011, and at that time, I just want to give you where I started and where we are and how we got there. We started with roughly 11,000 students. We were a state institution with an appropriation at that time roughly $37 million for our main campus. That money plus the state also covers the benefit of the staff or number of staff. And we had, year after year, we had deficit because they couldn't pay our bills, and we were raising tuition an average of 8 years. So starting 2011, going back 10 years. That was the story. Today we are 19,500 students. Our appropriation for that same campus is now $29 million, $8 million less. During this period, we raised the tuition and fees at or below the rate of inflation every year, and we have had $90 million surplus. So how did we do that? And that was basically the start of a whole new approach to the way that we decided to run Rowan. We basically said, this is now 27th century. The higher education in this country was built during the agrarian age, 200 or so years ago, and not much has really changed. It's still fall and spring, and people are supposed to go and pick fruit and vegetable in the summer, except that they don't. And semesters are exactly 4 years, 8 semesters, everybody gets the same degree with 120 credits, and we are questioning this thing. I was using the example of said, if you want to train a truck driver and an aircraft pilot, you spend exactly 4 years to train them, and if you don't, then why do you do so then for engineers and philosophers and historians and doctors and everybody exactly 4 years? In the case of doctor, that's a wrong example. But for the rest of the undergraduate, that was really the questions that we had, and we still do. Why should the courses be exactly 3 credit hours? Why should the academic year be fall and spring only? And why should degrees be exactly 4 years? And who said that the cookie cutter has to be bachelor's? Why should credential be bachelor? So starting with that premise, we built 4 pillars. improving access, reducing cost, improving quality and relevance of our degrees, and becoming an economic engine so that we can basically reinvigorate the community or region where we live. So moving forward, the 19,500 students that we are now, that's roughly 8,500 increase. That was an aggressive approach in the way that we, for example, use the county colleges. We have now 4 or 5 partners at county colleges, 2 of whom that have really changed their name to Rowan College at Gloucester County. We have now created degrees with these county colleges, the total which 4 years cost $25,000. We have created a specific workforce development courses that are delivered in the county colleges that belong to Rowan University, and we have given the 3rd year of the curriculum to the county colleges to deliver at their cost. So it's a 3+1 rather than 2+2. And these are specific degrees that are not duplicative on our main campus. This area has significantly grown the county college area, something that Patty Harper said to me, sitting here was very important. I really think the role of county colleges is critical in this country. Because if we want to really improve access and make the degrees relevant to workforce and improve quality and really try to kind of provide more affordability to everybody, we need to use the county colleges. So our approach in terms of access has been enormously beneficial in that regard. In terms of affordability, as I said, we have improved our scholarship from $5 million to $25 million. We have reduced the tuition and fees have been always kept at or below the rate of inflation increase year after year. And we have aggressively gone after the county colleges, and we have recently this year started handing the students zero cost degree. And the way the zero cost degree works is between Rowan University as well as the county of Gloucester, we have decided to hire 100 students of ours while they're studying. They're also working in the county or within the university. And whatever salary they're supposed to get goes through that 3+1 degree, and they get zero, they pay zero. So I'm going to try to explain that area. So affordability is very important to us. The relevance and quality, in my opinion, is the key. One of the questions that I ask in here, why is it that there is this trust? And I have experienced that, at least I have, is because somehow we reach the industry, or we talk to the industry when it's late. By the time our students have been trained and trained, it's too late. The industry says, you're not ready. For example, we have a very close relationship with Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin tells us, if you send us your engineers, it takes us 5 years to train them to become the kind of engineers that we want. So what have we started with them? We have started a whole new degree program called Combat Aircraft Engineering Certificate. So our mechanical, electrical, and other engineers can also take that certification with the Lockheed Martin engineers coming to our campus and teaching them. And these students, there are 20 of them per year, all of them go through internship, and every single one of them get hired by Lockheed. So they train them while they're studying, and we are working on this area very, very significantly, whether it's in the local government, whether it's major industries, and I really believe for all of us, there is huge opportunities in the area of insourcing jobs in this country. Millions of our jobs are right now going to other countries where we really, with low skill, and we have training about sales and customer service, we can really replace those jobs and prevent them from going outside. So that was in terms of the relevance of degree. In terms of economic engine, being an economic engine and helping the community, we live in a town where 12 or 13 years ago there were only 4 businesses in there. There was a coffee shop, there was an Angela Diner, an accountancy, and I believe a pharmacy. The region we called Rowan Boulevard, the borough basically bought that area, about 26 acres of land. They were, bad housing, bad situation, lots of crime, bought them all, leveled the place, and then we used other people's money, the investors who came in here to basically, the land for the borough, the money from the investors, and use for Rowan. We have built a $400 million oasis. That as a result, that area that used to only generate $110,000 tax for the borough of Glassboro now generates $4 million. We have hundreds of new businesses and retailers in here, restaurants after restaurants, hotels and bookstores and everything. The entire town has completely changed as a result of that movement. And our employment, Rowan University has roughly 1,600 employees to 4,000 employees today. And our students have their ID card. They can literally go to any store within the town and they spend money, and their ID card gets charged, and we get a percentage. So that partnership has significantly enhanced the development of the area and the quality of living in the area. People right now, as soon as the house is available, it's sold. Because And this was a place that really, there was no chance of people moving in and buying new homes. So what I'm saying is the messaging here is that if you look at the state institutions, we are a big operating budget wherever we are. If you truly find ways in which we can at the beginning go to the communities, to industries and partner with them and bring them to forth at the very beginning, even from the curricular point of view. And work also with the county colleges, with the local governments. There are tons of things that we could do that will enhance not only our institutions and solidify and strengthen it, but also it will hugely impact the community. I can tell you right now, as a state institution that had serious budget problem in the year 2011, I can tell you with confidence that for the next 10 years or so, I don't see any problem for Rowan. We have been, at least during this period where we had all of this surplus, we had $120 million of cash that we have just put away. So it's possible to be efficient, to employ public-private partnership, use other people's money. That's something that we have done. For example, over the past 7 years, we have built $1.2 billion of infrastructure around Rowan. 1.2 billion, and there's $100 billion going over the next 5 years. We are not talking to a company that is going to rent from us, lease from us 300 acres of land, and they built $350 million athletics complex, the second largest after Florida, Disneyland, that is going to have 40 or so soccer field, 12 baseball field, indoor stadium, outdoor stadium, hotels and everything else, and we are going to basically close our entire athletic. We're going to lease from them when we use them, and the balance of it is going to be basically commercial for them. So this way, we outsource the things that are not part of our core mission. One of the biggest problems our education has, they think they can do everything themselves. We have this fictitious world around us. We do food services, we repair cars, we do landscaping, and what our core mission really is create knowledge and impart knowledge. So our mission at Rowan is that, forget about everything else, our only core mission is creating knowledge and imparting knowledge. Everything else is game. Everything is public-private partnership. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the only way that I see the future of the institution be guaranteed. Put the things that are part of your capabilities in the hand of the people who are good at it. And in doing so, you create efficiency and you pass that efficiency to the students. We'll stop here. Thank you.
Really fascinating. All right, so who wants to be the next victim? All right.
I'm going to stand up, Erin, is that all right? Thanks very much. I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much, everyone, Peter and others. Thank you. Let me address quickly some of the issues that we have been assigned, and as sort of introductory material for what I'm going to say in just a few minutes. Mergers are going to increase. The frequency of mergers, the complexity of acquisition deals is going to increase in the future. Tenure will disappear as an anachronism. It is an anachronism now. In 10 years, it will have been completely undermined with hiring of non-tenured faculty, giving more power to non-tenured faculty, ultimately erasing the entire historical anachronism of tenure. There will be an increasing number of closures of institutions of higher education, and if we are wise and careful, they will be institutions who can afford to, and the society can afford to have them experience closure. The whole concept of shared governance will be ameliorated, will be mitigated, so that it doesn't function as a resistance to change, but becomes a part of the institution. All of those things are historical issues in higher education, and the only hope ultimately for higher education, after we've heard about the needs and the development directions, with the exception of Rowan and Arizona State and Drexel, never mind, the entire higher education establishment needs to transcend its history. If it does not move beyond its history, does not transcend its history, as I've sort of tried to imply, we will continue to lose competitiveness. Do not forget that the theme of the conference is higher education, its impact on American competitiveness. And we will lose our competitiveness as a country if higher education doesn't transcend its history. We've heard the phrase step up, we've heard the phrase do this, do that, and I'd like to just reframe that to say we've got to transcend our history, move beyond it. We heard a fair amount of that this morning. One of the panelists, Erin, spoke of resistance. Others have spoken of the culture of innovation and the fact that the faculty don't want to necessarily change. And an interesting phenomenon occurred here this morning that I have seen occur dozens and dozens, maybe 100 times in the last 10, 15 years. And that is that when this issue of faculty resistance is mentioned, a sort of titter of laughter goes across the room. You caught that this morning, didn't you? And what does that mean? It's a very important symbolic issue, that a little bit of laughter. What it really means is, yeah, you're right, but we can't do a goddamn thing about it. We had better learn to do something about it, or, as I say, American competitiveness will be lost. Now, all that by way of introduction, Erin, I'm sorry, you can tell me when my 15 minutes are up. I'm going to read to you a fairly formal paper, which I've been working on, and which I hope will one day get published. And if that gets too boring for you, please shout or something. So let me do it. Starts out by saying that which we've already heard and said, namely that there exists currently a growing sense in many quarters that the United States is losing its competitiveness on a world stage. There are a number of lines of evidence supporting this, and I'll only use one such argument. Recently, we saw some of that this morning. Can you hear me okay? How about that better? My hearing aids are so loud, I thought I was speaking too loud. Just recently, the United States Council on Competitiveness, in partnership with Gallup Incorporated, collected and reporting data which demonstrates a downward trend in American productivity measured as the GDP per capita. This trend has been going on for 50 years, essentially since the close of World War II. Now, that's not a coincidence. I'll talk more about that in a minute. The American dream and American competitiveness are inextricably interwoven. The narrative of infinite progress, of the sky being the limit, are both elements of the American dream and cannot continue. In fact, the American dream is under assault as well, without a culture of competitiveness, and the American dream is entirely inconsistent with a stultified educational culture. And so there's growing evidence that American competitiveness is stalled, as we have heard again this morning. And moreover, there appears to be a small but growing segment of our society which sees this pause in competitiveness as salutary, and that American exceptionalism is not only unwarranted, but also somehow reprehensible. And we need to engage that discussion. We cannot let that discussion wander about in the stratosphere. You may agree, you may disagree, you may come down on one side of that or the other, but we have got to engage that discussion. Should we indeed be competitive? Should we indeed be the most competitive, innovative culture in the world? It would be a mistake and an injustice to lay America's loss of competitiveness entirely at the feet of the higher education establishment. Nevertheless, it's really imperative that the establishment examine itself, examine the ways of doing business. It's urgent, in fact. The place to start in such an examination, to my mind, is sort of a historical understanding, and that's what I intend to try to do in the next few minutes, to understand better this issue, to trace a little bit of its historical roots. Now, I'd like to start by mentioning Alexis de Tocqueville, who who visited the United States when it was a fledgling country, spoke of education having taught utility, spoke of education as being deeply and powerfully contributing to the American way of life. And I think it's fair to say that American higher education has failed to keep its promise to promote American competitiveness. It's necessary for me to add really quickly, and I already alluded to it, that higher education is not a monolith. Drexel and Arizona State and Rowan are different, and the allegation I just made, the assertion I just made applies to some sectors, not others, applies to some classifications of universities and not others, and it's not my intention this afternoon to try to separate out those distinctions, but only to say what my father used to tell me: if the shoe fits, put it on, he said repeatedly. So the second, after our little introduction from Alexis de Tocqueville, the second major cultural event, the major landmark in higher education, indeed the major landmark in the culture of the West, the culture of the world, really, was World War II. We still live, believe it or not, in the shadow of World War II. The popular culture on the street takes many years, decades, to assimilate events such as that, and we are still in the assimilation process for some of the things that happened in World War II. That was particularly true in higher education. Higher education is affected in three ways by those events in the 40s. First of all, the GI Bill affected the capacity of this most important societal function. It affected can you hear me? Thanks. It affected the capacity of the entire higher education establishment. Secondly, there was an exchange of letters between then President Roosevelt and Vannevar Bush, who was at that point head of the Office of Scientific Investigation. I'll come back to that. And that exchange of letters set out a doctrine about university research that still is relevant today, that still is observed and quoted every day in most institutions of higher education, and needs to be thought about a little bit. And then, thirdly, after World War II, a philosophy of sort of despair went by a number of names, existentialism and other such. A philosophy of despair seized the West, and that philosophy diminished our ethical foundations, for better or for worse, and it also diminished our faith in the American dream. So I'm going to try briefly to speak about those three items that are the long shadow cast by World War II on the institution of higher education. The Veterans Readjustment Act, so-called GI Bill, produced a major ramping up of capacity in American higher education. Most of it salutary. Indeed, I think we can credit the GI Bill with the creation, really, of the American middle class. However, nearing the end of World War II, the other great functions that ramped up, the building of tanks, the building of aircraft, were able to modulate their output. They were able to throttle down the tank plant in Warren, Michigan, and Lima, Ohio. Were able to throttle down the aircraft, the bomber plant in Ypsilanti was able to throttle down its output. But for a number of reasons, higher education could not or would not adjust downward its capacity build-up. So what has happened then is in the bricks and mortar aspect, the residential college aspect, the Ivy covered building aspect of higher education has grown far beyond what is necessary. It's greatly overbuilt. It's costing millions and millions of dollars when the other parts of the institution, distance learning maybe, we heard a fair amount about that this morning, innovation enterprises, spin-off corporations, the commitment to spin-off corporations is not growing He put a tremendous amount of money after World War II in the ivy-covered buildings and not in the functions that are currently so desperately needed in our country. So we are reaping still the impact of the GI Bill in that regard. Remember now that I said it wasn't the GI Bill per se, it was the university's inability to readjust when the GI Bill was no longer needed the way it was originally developed. Shortly after World War II, I said before a minute ago, there occurred a remarkable exchange of letters between President Franklin G. Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Vannevar Bush, then director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development. That remarkable exchange of letters produced from Vannevar Bush a letter which has subsequently been entitled Science, the Endless Frontier. And Bush in that letter repeatedly stresses the value of basic research, which he defined as research with no, listen now, research with no immediate end in mind. Research which is characterized by the free play of the intellect, working on subjects of their own choice, working on subjects of the faculty's own choice. That has become the Toledo, really, of research institutions throughout the country, indeed almost throughout the world. No less reliant than Albert Einstein spoke and wrote in support of that concept of free play of the intellect in whatever field or direction you happen to want to do. And that credo has served us well for 70 years. We have become the most innovative, technologically oriented country in the world. But the idea, I think, that Vannevar Bush wrote about just spoke of supporting that kind of research, government monies to support it and other things. And I believe, looking back, that it was their intent, Roosevelt and Bush, to move to subsequent generations, or at least subsequent folk, the difficult questions of should every institution strive to be a research university? Should every individual faculty member conduct quote-unquote curiosity-driven research? Are there other ways to increase the innovation yield of research? How is curiosity-driven research to be distinguished from a mere hobby? How can an institution focus on distinguishing themes if investigators are free to follow their own curiosity? These other questions have been largely ignored for the last 70 years. Everybody may follow their own dream or curiosity wherever they want, often on tuition money that kids or their parents paid, or tax dollars, as opposed to funded through the legitimate research agencies. If you have a grant from the NIH or the NSF, fine, follow what you're going to follow. But if you're spending tuition dollars, fungible dollars that have been moved from the tuition pot to the research pot, and you're investigating the mating behavior of bees or bugs or birds, you probably need to think twice about the need for that. Granting that that is good for the society, the question still is asked for an answer, namely, how much of that good can we afford? If it is good, and I think it probably is, how much of that good thing can we afford as a society? And we rarely ask or try to answer that question. I'll give you 5 minutes, I'll make it. So much has changed in the last 7 decades. And I'll end by saying that perhaps what I repeated a few minutes ago, it would be a great misunderstanding, an overgeneralization to say before World War II, the world was linear, personal philosophies, institutional philosophies were understandable, linear, and well-founded, and that since World War II, that they have prevailing philosophy has been characterized by sort of a chaotic post-structuralism, even post-truthism. You'll recall the cover of Time magazine about a year ago said, "Is truth dead?" And the Oxford Dictionary is for 2016. The word of the year was chosen post-truth. And so we have entered a society, and I submit to you that it's largely once again in the shadow of World War II, of despair, of post-structuralism, of not having clear vision of where we're going, what we're about, what we're trying to do in our culture. And I believe that too, that's the third item, that has negatively impacted American competitiveness. Now, let me finish by saying I don't want this to come across entirely negative. There's a lot of criticism here, but it's truly meant to be constructive. If we don't engage some of these issues, I believe we will ultimately lose our competitiveness altogether. It's already under attack. And the only way to continue to reap the great benefits, the wonderful benefits of higher education in all of its pieces and parts, the only way to continue to enjoy that largesse would be for us to re-examine some of these issues and recommit to many of them and discard perhaps a few. But the attitude of really a new start is absolutely necessary if higher education is going to continue to contribute to American competitiveness. So thanks. Did I make the five?
You sure did. Hear that? Tenure is dead. Take that home with you. Next we have Chancellor Gold, University of Nebraska, Omaha.
Let's see if this will work.
Jeff Gold and I have tag teamed so many presentations that we haven't compared notes, but I know his presentation will fit.
Well, then he doesn't need to be here, right?
We did the other end of the other bookend.
Okay, let's try it. I think we're good. Okay. Well, first of all, well, maybe not. I'm good, but we'll see if this works. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you. I'm really grateful. My younger brother asked me about 6 months ago or so whether I would spend some time in Philadelphia today, and I figured any opportunity to be at the Fed would be at least entertaining. And so thanks for the opportunity, and also, of course, thanks to the sponsors. He said to me, be provocative. After Dr. Jacobs, I'm not so sure I can do that, but I will try, and I titled what I'm going to share with you today, Back to the Future. I do have a lot of slides, but I do plan to steam through them because they are data-rich in terms of the trajectory and some of the changes, and then I hope to be able to share an example with you as well. I have no conflicts or disclosures. I'm going to ask for appropriate permissions and apologies. For some reason, we're not seeing it up there, so it is on the screen to be behind me, I'm sure. Thank you. I have multiple background information. It's all in the materials that you've been provided. I also add that I have a number of volunteer board positions across the United States, everything from accreditation organizations, the American Hospital Association, the AMA, and many others. I don't think any of them are conflicts to what I'm going to share with you today. They're just lots of experience. I also want to thank these corporations who involuntarily shared some images with me. They were gleaned off the internet, and apologies to all of them. So, for those of you that don't know where Nebraska is, I will show you a map. It's right in the middle of the United States, and we are known for many things, but we are known for 6 Saturday afternoons a year, although this has not been a terribly wonderful year thus far, but we're in a rebuilding mode. But in Omaha, we are also known for a large academic health center, which is one of the 4 main campuses of the university. In aggregation, we do We have an economic impact system-wide of about $7.5 billion, employ just over 60,000 people, have just under, I think, 58,000 students registered at the current time. So a significant organization. Of course, lest I forget Division I athletics. How could I ever forget that? But the Academic Health Science Center is 12 million square feet. It's located in Omaha, and over the last 10 years, we've added 2 million square feet without accessing the debt markets, which is really quite an astounding statement in the legacy of higher education. We're also a global university. We have sites and relationships all around the world, which, as you fly over the state of Nebraska, you might not realize, but makes it for a very interesting place. So anyhow, having said that, what do I plan to do in the next 15 minutes? I'm going to try to set the stage with some historic educational trends, propose a set of innovative guideposts, describe one potential transformation, and if nothing else, I hope to inspire a future vision, a vision of leadership, innovation, and enduring change. And so in order to do that, we have to define the word vision. And I'll take a minute of your time. I don't know how many of you have seen this photograph before, but I'd like you to take just a minute to look at it. This is actually a model who is sitting on a stand in a studio. If you look very carefully at it, you'll see it's a he. His right hand is sitting next to him. His right knee is flexed. His left hand is draped over the top of his head. And while the screen resolution may not be quite that sharp, I assure you that that is the case here. And the point being is that things aren't always what they seem. So I'm going to ask you to dissect carefully the data that I'm going to share with you, and then hopefully develop your own vision of the future for higher education. So I would suggest that the grand vision of higher education is to enhance human performance and personal development for the workplace, for the quality of life, etc. And that is a very complex mission. As Dr. Jacobs just told you, it's a combination of education, research, service, and, of course, deals very intimately with extensive external public and private forces, which are larger and, frankly, more powerful than they've ever been, which are, I would like to propose to you, governed by something called the social contract. Now, for those of you that are not used to that concept, the social contract really dates to the late 1600s, early 1700s. It's particularly well described in this book by Rousseau, I am told, because I don't speak the language. But in sum, it says that society cedes the right to a profession because of three and only three assumptions. The assumption of expertise, the assumption of altruism, and the assumption of self-scrutiny. And I would like to suggest to you that higher education, just like the profession of medicine, in which Dr. Jacobs and I labored for decades, has this responsibility. We are assumed to be expert in what we're doing, we are assumed to be altruistic, and we are assumed to be able to have self-scrutiny. And so what I'd like to ask you about is, are we really living up to that mission? Are we fulfilling the social contract in the educational aspect of what we're doing? Is the glass half empty, or is the glass half full? And so there's one set of assumptions, that higher education is innovative, educational, technology is new, provides excellent training, relevant focused programs, excellent didactic learning, it's multidisciplinary, indeed it's of appropriate duration, it's of high value, and it's highly affordable. Then unfortunately there are other views of higher education in our country, and I'm speaking mostly about our country, that it is outmoded educational systems, the technology is aging, the training is outdated, frustrating, mostly bricks and mortar, there's limited learning that's experiential, it's highly siloed instruction with variable outcomes that are not competency-based, and that from an economic perspective, it's of excessive duration, questionable value, and increasingly unaffordable. So I would ask you, what is the difference there? Where are you? So let me ask you a question. How many of you in this room are graduates of a college or university? Just raise your hand. How many of you have a child or grandchild that's a graduate of a college or university? Raise your hand. So there's a pretty clear value statement here, if you vote with your feet, that there's at least some confidence that the higher education system in this country is achieving some goals. Now, a couple of charts for you. This is a run chart from 1869 to 2010 of the total enrollment in higher education in the United States, in universities, in four-year universities, broken down by public and private. This is a look at the enrollment since 1955 through 2010 of public and privates, which you see a significant now enrollment of just over 20 million people. This is a look at the six-year graduation rates. So it's broken down into the nonprofit, public, and for-profit universities. And you see the six-year graduation rates from 1999 through 2010 cohort, who would have graduated in 2016, hasn't changed, even for the nonprofits and the publics, and it's actually fallen some for the for-profits. This is a look at the cost of attendance. So again, broken down into private and public. If you look at the privates, gone from about $13,000, $14,000 up to about $45,000. By the way, all these slides are available, so do what you wish with them, and I'll give you the references in a second. And that's a chart, run chart from 2000 through 2014, looking at the cost of college up there in red, the inflation rate, and then the median household income in the United States. Again, these are four-year institutions we're talking about here. So you see a very, very significant trend over time. Just for comparison, across the very top here, you see over the last 25 years, college tuition, child care, health care. By the way, the black line horizontally across is the 55% inflation rate over this 25-year interval. Cars seem to have gone down. A good deal have been flat. Cell phone services fall. Software, toys, and I guess the very bottom is TV. So there's a message there where TVs are more affordable than ever. This is a run chart that looks from 2000 through 2017 at the average debt. This is graduation debt for undergraduates, and so in 2003, the graduation debt was about $18,000, $19,000, and it's now just under $34,000 for the privates and $27,000 for the public universities. This looks at the loan value for business administration, undergraduate, and private and publics. So it tells you if you retain that debt, you pay it off over 30 years. It tells you what your total out-of-pocket expenses would be. And don't forget, there's a time value of money factor that has to go into that. And in the fields that I know pretty well, medicine, other doctorates, and law, you see that the cumulative debt at the time of graduation has now reached, for the Doctor of Medicine degree, almost $240,000 in this country. For the law degree, it's about $130,000. These are averages, public and private rated. Well, what I'd like to show you here is the total loan value. That's for the doctoral degrees. So for a $130,000 degree, $170,000 becomes debt service on that. For the law degree, there's $250,000 of debt service on that. And for the medical degree, there's $380,000 on $200,000 of debt. So if you ask the question as to where students and families are really putting their hard-earned dollars as they pay for higher education, both undergraduate and graduate higher education in our country, it's actually going to the lending organizations at a factor of approximately 2-to-1 compared to where it is going to the undergraduate and graduate educational programs. And I would say to you that if supporting the lending organizations is the core of the mission of higher education, we're doing a really good job. Not so sure that's, at least it's not in my mission statement. So this is a look at the totality of student debt. You've seen part of this chart before. There's currently $1.4 trillion in student debt. And by the way, it is the only unsecured debt, unlike homeowners debt and other types of debt, credit card debt, auto debt, etc. they can always take your car or your TV or your home, but this is completely unsecured debt. And by the way, that debt is not uniform across the United States. It is highest in the states that are colored red and lowest in the states that are colored brown. If you were to compare that to the percent of low-income students in the United States, where the lowest income students are red and the highest income students are in the blues and yellows, what you see is there's a very, very significant mismatch between the totality of student debt and the ability of students and families to pay for that. And then finally, in these run charts, this is a look at default rates on student debt. So in 2016, from debt originating in 2012, which is just 4 years, the default rate is 15.5%. And by the way, it does vary a good deal for private nonprofits, which are 8.5%, publics are 13.5%, and for-profits have a stunning default rate over 4 years of 24.9% of the debt. So we've got $1.4 trillion with a 4-year default rate of 15%. I mean, I don't need a degree in economics to know that that's a problem for our country and for those as well. But add to that, we spent a lot of time talking about competency, but beyond competency is proficiency, beyond proficiency is expertise, and beyond expertise is mastery. I can tell you I spent 25 years fixing little babies' hearts. When some mom hands her newborn over to me, she's not interested in whether I'm competent or not, believe me. She hopes I'm at least expert, and possibly even more than that, based on the experience. And yet most of our educational system is based at defining and maintaining competency. And what that not enough, we aim for proficiency in all of our education and training, but over a 40-year career that drifts. And I'm not so sure that we have the systems in place to maintain the knowledge and the skills at the university level and beyond for a rapidly changing, technologically sophisticated world. So are we accomplishing the grand vision? I'm not so sure. I'm going to try to hit 5 minutes. I'll do my best. We have exceeded human knowledge capabilities. So what used to be what you learn in college or you learn in grad school would carry you through most of your career, that is no longer true. We depend heavily on on-the-job training. Highly precision skills are required. The working environments are increasingly stressful. There's constant evolution of standards in all of our jobs. We depend much more on teams than individuals, and productivity and throughput are now measured more precisely than ever. So in summary, maintaining the status quo is not going to work, and it will lead to progressive loss of educational outcome, fiscal sustainability, loss of societal confidence, professional privilege. Indeed, we will have failed the social compact if we have not done so already. So one could see the cup half empty. I'd rather see it half full as this being a significant opportunity for higher education. So I would suggest to you, going back to a different Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, that this is the time to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, although checkered by failure, and we need to think what it means to dare mighty things in higher education. Now, we spend a lot of time, whether it's the fault of individuals or the fault of the systems, but at the end of the day, systems are built by people. People own the systems, they create them, they evolve them, and we all have a responsibility. So saying the system is broken is not really a good solution at all. I harken back to actually one of my favorite sources, which is Jim Collins, who once said in a large public meeting when asked the question of why is it that higher education is so resistant to change. He looked out at the audience and said, for those of you who really dislike change, you're certainly going to hate being irrelevant. And I think there's an awful lot of truth to Mr. Collins' comments. So, the question is, what is the future model? So I would say pretty simply, it's to focus on the social contract, to embrace adult learning, to utilize experiential learning formats, to customize the learning experience, to break down the traditional silos, to separate the competencies from the degrees, as we've already talked about, to engage more with artificial intelligence, augmented and virtual reality technology, to create continuous lifelong learning, to build stronger community interdependence, and to completely redefine the financial model. And so let's just take one more minute and talk about the financial model before I step down. And that is to what I would suggest we consider is to completely eliminate or markedly reduce all tuition and fees. To eliminate or completely reduce as much as possible the unsecured educational debt structure. To create lifelong learning currency investments. To initiate a tax-free learning currency structure that allows educational credits to count against your income. To implement employment benefit learning currency, that is to say to have employers purchase education the same way employers purchase health care and other benefits for their workforce. To allow portable global use of learning currency, to allow it to be exchangeable. And then to exchange work for service and learning currency, and to facilitate public-private partnership models. And I would say to you that these public-private partnership models allow for the innovation and the alignment of the public sector and the private sector in all components of higher education. They force the dialogue between business, industry, philanthropy, government, and higher education if they're going to jointly invest in resources and jointly invest in outcomes. And so I was going to give you one example of that, but I will perhaps talk about it during the discussion period. But I thank you very much for your time, and again, as I said, all the data and the references are available for you. Thanks so much.
That's fabulous, thank you. So I would like to ask the panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions, who is doing it right? I guess we could point to Rowan, who's already doing this.
But different people are doing it different. Every institution that I know of, they are looking at various models that fits their institution, trying to do things. So I think when I look at the leaders of higher education, talk to the leaders of higher education, I think all of us more or less know what the challenges are. The question is what kind of solution fits our institution and our culture, and I think everybody more or less is trying because we have no choice. If we don't do it, we're going to become victim to whatever changes others make.
So I'll do this in a single sentence when I fear I'm slightly overgeneralized once again. The 2 years are doing it right, and the 4 years are not. The 2 years are doing it right in terms of staying in the community, working with industry, working with other agencies, developing internships, developing experiential learning. If we were to model our entire system, the entire higher education establishment against the two-year institutions, we would be miles ahead. I'm a 7-year guy.
So I would say that there are incredible examples of programs, colleges across the country that are doing it right. And give you one unusual example. In Nebraska, we're very blessed that we have something called the Thompson Learning Community. Susan Thompson Buffett was Mr. Buffett's late wife, and they created what's affectionately known as the TLC. They provide full tuition, fees, living, food, textbooks, technology for 4,000 students. Plus wraparound advising, counseling, etc. services, all for underserved students, almost all first generation, etc. with a 96% first year to second year retention rate and a 92% 6-year graduation rate. And this program has been up and running now for over 10 years. And if you look at the economic earning potential of these students, it is truly astounding, and many of them do stay in the community. So there are examples of institutions, and as was alluded to, public-private partnerships that do get it right. But, on the same token, I would say you can take almost any large university system in the country, public or private, and they can find opportunities for improvement.
Well, you mentioned the
Currency exchange for work, Rowan is already doing that, correct?
well, many of us are doing that. Certainly in the health professions, it's extremely commonly done. But it's not being done widely across undergraduate education, and we're still at a time where we are asking young women and young men, and unfortunately their families, to pay for this educational experience at a time that they're least able to pay for it. So why not stretch it out over a longer period of time when they're more able to pay for it and give them continuous lifelong learning? By the way, if you took 10% of what's going to the lending agencies as opposed to what's going to the universities and colleges, you would deal with the majority of the financial problems and markedly lower the state's public sector, if you will, of investment.
So we have a question?
Thank you for this discussion. Esther Bremer, CEO of NAFSA, the Association of International Educators. And I want to come to your point about who's doing it right and link together with this panel and earlier conversations about the role of remaining open to the international influences being globally focused as part of innovation in the United States. One of the other great things after the Second World War was our increase in the number of international students, scholars, researchers, and entrepreneurs who want to come to this country and contribute. And we need to keep the United States open and welcoming to do so, because not only is it beneficial for our productivity, it also helps those students who are on campuses who won't travel. Part of access for the vast majority of students who won't be able to go abroad is getting that global perspective that will help them be globally prepared workers in the future. And so that's an important part of access. And so to say that examples of people who are doing it well are some of the great institutions across the United States that are innovating on internationalization on their campuses. I'll say NAFSA, each year we actually give something called the Simon Awards, precisely for those institutions that are doing that. Those that have comprehensive awards because their entire institution has really done remarkable things, and the Spotlight Awards for programs that are maybe more narrowly focused but are showing that innovation can happen in institutions of all sizes and types across the country.
Who's next? Yes.
Thank you. I think this question of competitiveness, while very, very relevant, leads me to ask the question, how could China do so well and we do so badly in the same 50-year span of time? What are they doing that we're not doing? And it's not simply, I don't think, contributing to their ability to have a command economy, because they're even doing capitalism better than we are. So what's the issue?
Are they doing better than us?
They're doing capitalism better than we are.
Just one data point. In one generation, United States went from #1 in the world in terms of percentage of adults with higher education to #8 currently, and is going down further. And that speaks volume of what you're saying, even though this country has by far the best institutions, the best intellectual capital, the best laboratories and all of that, and it spends significantly more money than the rest of the China or India and other. But that's what's happening right now. If you look at the landscape, because one of the reasons that I really think is the case, because we haven't, at least the higher education hasn't really changed, and even K through 12. You look at the 12th year of the high school in here, what do kids do in 12th year? Really, I mean, think about it. You look at your own kid, why are we wasting a whole year of the kids at a massive expense to everybody? When that year could be a year that remediation, county colleges could go in there and offer a lot of remedial course and get these kids ready for the real college, and they don't.
You know, I can tell you, the University of Nebraska has extensive relationships in China on the undergraduate and graduate level. We exchange students, faculty, research, healthcare programs, etc. And with some very rare exceptions, you probably wouldn't want to have yourself or a loved one hospitalized in China today. That's true. And there are some other examples of that I would quote now, not to say that the advance of capitalism and the economic models are good, bad, or indifferent, but there are still many things that we can learn from each other to improve each other. And then, to your point, international exchange is the name of the game. We make them better, they make us better, all boats rise.
So I have a question for you, you three. When do you think we're going to see a cross-continental merger? You know, like a Penn merging with London School of Economics. Is that going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Or medical school?
I am one of a half dozen current and former university presidents who are, I am one of a half dozen former and current university presidents who are doing some research on questions exactly like that. When is a merger in the offing, when is it likely to succeed, what are the critical success factors, and so on. And I would only say at this point, in answer to your question, that geographic proximity is a very important critical success factor. And overcoming geographic non-proximity is going to be a big issue. It's different when University of Nebraska has programs in China. There's no question about that being a merger of equals, actually. A merger of equals without geographic proximity is pretty darn difficult to create.
Okay, last question?
Two things. First of all, it's my understanding that the first international
Can you wait for the microphone, Michael, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes?
It's my understanding that there is a international university, the Cornell Tech in New York City is a merger of the Technion and Cornell. It's a merger of equals. So there is that going on.
And Bruce Cohn is here. He works on that for Citicorp, and he's going to tell us all about it.
Very good.
There are a lot of these mergers. I mean, we get INSEAD in France is working with Wharton College as well as the University of Singapore in terms of sending students to those places to get training and to exchange ideas and working on projects. But the idea of these mergers, especially at the international level, only can happen on a case-by-case basis. Some institutions that are reputable and well-known are very much in demand in those countries. But in the whole landscape of higher education, when we look at the vast majority of people who want to seek education, these kind of mergers is not going to impact them. I think the solution has to be in here, and even merging here are not easy. I've seen countless examples of mergers of institutions that never really merge culturally, and the challenge to the merger of culture in higher education is difficult because they change, and everybody said change. You ask professor how many years does it take to change a light bulb, they say, oh my God, change? Nobody wants change. So as a result, that becomes very, very difficult to merge and to kind of create these kind of new kind of scaled up institutions and be successful.
I would only add merger to what end? I mean, merger to the end that it enhances programs, creates better access, allows you to deliver quality programs at a lower cost. That's of value. But to take out a small number of administrative overhead for the purpose of tremendous institutional change and unrest, at the end of the day, is just destructive. And so it's got to be to the betterment of our mission. And that's a really, sometimes people change for the sake of change. There's an awful lot of that in our industry. There's an awful lot of that in healthcare. And it's almost always destructive.
Let me underscore that. I have personally presided over, I was president of the university that underwent a major merger successfully, I would say. At least in 10 years, no one's talking about divorce. But I can tell you this, you don't save any money. It costs money.
All right, thanks everyone, and we're going to wrap up.